G'day YouTubers, this is part 3 of the series on Central Moreton Bay, and I'm still just barely scratching the surface. In this episode I'm going to cover Bird and Goat Island, Deanbilla Bay and Dunwich. I was hoping to fit a bit more in, like the 1 Mile and Mayora, but I'll have to hold them over to the next video because this one's up around 15 minutes, and that's the sort of limit I'd like to stick to. I often get asked about how far it is to go from the ramp to a particular place, or how long it takes, or how much fuel do I need. So I've decided to add a segment at the beginning of these videos just to give you a rough idea of the distance, time and fuel consumption involved. I used 20 knots as a cruising speed to calculate the times, and I've used 23 litres an hour to calculate the fuel consumption in dead calm conditions. That's a little bit more than you should need. I'd expect most boats to get 1 nautical mile per litre, so I've used just slightly more than that to be on the safe side. Just remember that if it's rough, you could use twice as much fuel as I've quoted here. The rougher it is, the more fuel you're going to use. I've rounded the times up to the next 5 minutes because it'll take a little bit of time to get out of the 6 knot zone in the harbour, and I've rounded all the fuel usage up to the next litre. Still, you're the captain, and the safety of your boat and the people on board is entirely your responsibility. It's up to you to do the calculations for yourself to make sure that you have enough fuel on board. These are just a general guide. Let's have a talk about Goat Island. Now that's an island that doesn't seem to get a lot of fishing traffic these days. At least when I'm going within sight of it, I don't see any boats over there fishing, or if I do, there's only 1 or 2. But in reality, it was quite a good fishing spot back in the day. I haven't fished it personally for maybe 15 years or so. Probably more than that, because it was back in the days before I had a GPS. Had a fish finder, but I don't have any GPS marks for it. I do have some triangulations that I used to use for knowing where to go to fish. And I had a fish finder that let me find the fish once I got into the area. But no GPS marks, but I can show you where I used to fish. If you're over that way, stop and give it a go, see how it treats you. It used to be fairly good to me. Oh, and by the way, memory is fallible, but as I recall, it used to fish better about an hour, hour and a half either side of the top of the tide. I've drawn a yellow line on the map to mark a drop-off that runs along the eastern side of the island and down to the southern tip. Now, any of that might be worth fishing, but where we used to fish was just off that beacon on the southern point of the island. As I recall, we're just a little bit south, or maybe southeast of that beacon, but fairly close to it. When I say fairly close, again, memory's hazy, but I would guess maybe 50 feet. What's that in metres? About a third of that. So say 15 metres. Sounds about right. Don't want to be too far away from the beacon because the ferry from Dunwich comes through that channel sometimes, and you certainly don't want to be in their way. If they're coming along and it looks like you're in their way, best for you to move out of the way, because there's a channel through there and you don't want to block it. But if you're up fairly close to the beacon, then the worst you're going to get is a bad rock. If in doubt, try one of the fishing spots I'll mention in a minute nearby, and just keep an eye out for the ferry and just see where he does go, and then you'll know where it's safe for you to sit. Now, apologies for there being no GPS mark for this, but this is the way we did it old school. Start off lined up with the beacon just to the west of it, and drive directly west until you come to a drop-off. I'm reaching from memory here, but I think the drop-off is around about the 5 metre mark, about 15 feet or so, over a very short distance. So you're in a sort of a trench, can't miss it. If you keep going, it'll rise up again a bit further on, but the rising up will be more gradual than the drop-off. There's another fishing spot that you need to find old school to the south of the island. If you start off lined up with the most western edge of the island, but due south of it, so pretty much the point on the southwest side of the island, due south of that, and then travel due south, the bottom will be around the 20 to 25 foot mark, so say 7 or 8 metres. It'll fluctuate a little bit, but then you'll get to a point where it drops down nearly double. It'll go down to around about the 50 feet or 15 metres, somewhere in that area. And then you're in another trench, and that trench runs northwest, southeast, more or less. You'll be able to zigzag along it, stay on that northern drop-off. As you go further south, the bottom comes up again, but it's quite a gradual rise, as I recall. You want to fish that sharper drop off on the northern edge of the deep area. Once you find it, just zigzag along it and see if you can find some fish. No point in dropping your line if you can't see fish on the sounder. And that's a fair way south of the island, probably half a nautical mile or a bit better south of the island. Quite a bit further than the other mark is, the one I said to the west of the island. Now, I don't think I've ever seen anyone else dropping crab pots in around Goat. Might be someone who does, but they've just never been there when I've been there. However, whenever we were fishing it, we used to drop a couple of crab pots down that blue line, maybe 2, 3, 4, whatever, and then go and have a fish and pick them up on the way back and have a feed of fish and crabs. Never got a great deal of crabs there, but there was always half a dozen, which was enough for a feed. You'll have to figure out how much water to drop them in, because crabs do prefer different depths at different times. I usually start off about 10 feet of water and then maybe go out a bit deeper. So if you've got, say, 4 pots to drop in, start dropping 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet, see how that goes. I keep talking in feet, can't help it. Divide by 3 to get metres. So 12 feet's about 4 metres, 6 feet's about 2 metres. And I wouldn't drop crab pots in any shallower than 2 metres. Also check your tide too, that's important. Don't drop them in 2 metres if you're on high tide, because you'll come back there and you'll have trouble getting in shallow enough to pick them up. And finally, there's that turquoise blob in between Bird and Goat Island. I don't even know if this is still there, because I wouldn't take a fiberglass boat into that area. Back in the day we had the big boat, we had the tinny as a tender, we could run in there and get a feed of oysters, because there was a nice little oyster bank in there at low tide. You could go and have a feed of oysters off the rocks. It may or may not still be there, and as I said, I most certainly would not take a fiberglass boat into there. You're going to get your gel coat all scratched. I don't think it matters how hard you try, you're going to. If you go in there, take it real easy. Hopefully you'll have nice clear water, have someone up the nose of the boat to tell you what's happening, and work your way in. It's worth a look to see if it's still there if you like oysters. Well, I didn't have any GPS marks. After I'd finished the video and I was listening to it, it suddenly occurred to me that I could use the Navionics app to make some GPS marks. So I've calculated the marks out, drive due west from the beacon for 0.3 of a nautical mile. And on this slide, that is the calculated GPS mark. Could be a little bit off because it's calculated on the app, but it'll be close. Once you get there, you can look around and find that drop-off. You should be able to find it fairly easily, I hope. And I've done the same thing for the spot to the south of the island. Drive directly south from the western edge of the island for about 0.6 of a nautical mile according to Navionics. And there's the mark on the drop-off. Now in both cases I've taken the drop-off from the Navionics contours of the bottom, so it is a bit iffy whether the mark's exactly on it or not, but it should be close enough to let you find it. If you do have trouble finding it, just go back to the beginning near the island and try finding it old school style. And finally I'll just say a few things about Bird Island. Back in the day, that was the cartoonist's idea of a desert island. There's a little picture of it the way I remember it up in the corner of the screen there. Just this beautiful sand island, really small, with trees all in the middle of it. You could pull up to the sand on the eastern side, put the nose on the beach, and there was probably 6 feet of water under the back of the boat. That's how steeply it dropped off. Beautiful, beautiful spot to stop for a picnic, but now it's gone. It's just really nothing more than a sandbank. I wouldn't even call it an island anymore. It's a sandbank that's exposed at low tide. Whatever the reason behind it, I personally blame the car ferries. They drove really close to it. Every time they passed, there was like waves coming into the island, and over the years, and it has taken years and years for it to happen, over the years I reckon they've washed it away. I know they've got a business to run and these things happen, but it is really sad that we've lost Bird Island. The next item on the agenda is Deanbilla Bay, and that is an anchorage. Well, at least an anchorage of sorts. It does have its drawbacks. It's just south of Dunwich on Stradbroke Island. If you're in Peel in Horseshoe Bay, say, and the weather's going to turn to the southeast and you don't have time to get to anywhere else, head to Deanbilla Bay. It certainly wouldn't be my pick of places to go, but it is an acceptable anchorage if you're hiding from a strong southeaster. There's a sandbank that juts out on the southern side of the bay. It's marked with a beacon, and that's about the only thing you need to watch out for as you approach. There's a few places around the bay where you can beach your tender to get off the boat. I preferred that beach I've marked with a green line at the northern end of the bay, because back in the day we had a dog on board, and of course I got the job of taking the dog to shore 3 times a day, give it a run, swim, and let it do whatever it needed to do. And that was regardless of the weather, and some days I made the trip in some atrocious weather. I remember one time I was flagged down on the way back, and this was a time when we had a very strong southeaster blowing for about 4 days, and the roll does come into Deanbilla Bay on the high tide when that sandbank on the southern end gets covered. And there's this other boat there, a sailing boat, with a young couple on board, and they flagged us down as we came back off the shore. I went over to them to see what they wanted, and they wanted to get off their boat. They only had a really tiny dinghy that was just big enough for 2 people, and it was that rough they were frightened to take that into the shore. They were seasick. They'd been seasick for 3 days. They didn't care what happened to the boat, they just wanted to get off. So I took the dog back to my boat, came back and took them into shore. I often wonder how that boat got on and how they got on, but I never did hear from or see them again. Dimble Bay's got a weedy, muddy bottom on it, and that blow was so strong and lasted so long that our anchor dug in so deep that we couldn't winch it up. The winch just wasn't strong enough to pull it out of the mud. Ended up tying it off on the bollard and driving the boat forward to wrench the anchor free. I got no idea how deep it was, but when I got it up I had half an anchor there. Fortunately we had a spare anchor on board. You can enter Deanbilla Bay from the north through that marked channel, although I have been told that that gets really shallow at times, and from what I've been told that's shallow enough that a trailer boat will have trouble getting through it at low tide. I don't know whether that's true, I've never actually used that channel. My preferred entry into Deanbilla Bay is around the south of Goat Island, and then just head a little bit north to dodge that sandbank. And looking at the map of Dimble Bay these days, there's a lot of moorings in there. I haven't been in there since I had the big boat, so I don't know what they're about. They certainly weren't there when I was there. I know some of them belong to the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron. I don't know about the others. If they're public moorings, well and good, you can tie up to them. Certainly needed, because the bottom in Dimble Bay is really bad for anchoring. You've really got to work to make sure your anchor drives in and hulls. Reverse back after you drop your anchor and make sure it digs in and you get a really tight rope. That muddy, weedy bottom is hard to get into. But even if the moorings aren't public, you should be able to find room to anchor up a trailer boat if you need to. Dunwich is just north of Deanbilla Bay, and this is a view from Google Earth just looking south from Dunwich to Deanbilla Bay, just to give you a bit of an idea of the layout of it if you're not familiar with it. The same thing, Google Earth view looking north to give you an idea of just how it all fits together. That's 1 mile just north of Dunwich. We'll talk about that next. Just on the southern side of Dunwich is the terminal where the car ferries come in, and the passenger ferries as well, I might add. If you're visiting the area, just stay clear of the path that they use. And just north of the terminal where the ferries dock is a nice little beach. The real significance of that beach, at least as far as I'm concerned, is it's not very far from the shops if you need to reprovision. And that's where we used to go to reprovision when we were out on the big boat for a couple of weeks at a time. The shortest route to the shops is across the sports oval that's just up from the beach. So if you're going in for provisions these days, it's probably a good idea to go in during the week, because I expect the sports oval will be in use on the weekends. And going around it would make for a much longer walk. And the last thing I wanted to say about Dunwich is that there's a lot of structure sticking out into the water there. And whenever you find structure in the form of posts and pylons, there's going to be bait fish hanging around there. So if you're after some live bait, it often pays to throw us a beaky down beside those. Just be aware that it's a ferry terminal. There's a lot of boat traffic there, a lot of very large boat traffic there. So it's up to you to stay out of everyone's way. If in doubt, don't go there. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I'm sorry I didn't have any live footage from this area. I have been down there once or twice in the last year, It was too windy at the time for me to want to fly my drone on one day, and on the other occasion I was just too busy to take the time to get my drone up. I did have some footage out of the boat at one stage, but I ran out of space on my hard drive and I think I must have deleted that, which is a bit of a shame because that footage included Bird Island, or rather the Bird Island sandbar as it is now. Anyway, at least I've been able to give you some insight into what to do around this area even without live footage. I hope it encourages you to go and explore that area for yourself. In the next video I'll move further up along Stradbroke. Until then, good fishing.